r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Lou_NS. I work at a restaurant. You won't believe what we've been getting in our food orders recently. Have you ever seen one of those small diners in the middle of nowhere? Even though the business has thinned, and you don't see them much anymore, they still seem to thrive in my part of the rural South. I used to think it was just the charm, but recently, I've learned the reason is a lot more sinister. I'm just a dishwasher and I've worked there for what had seemed like forever, but in reality, it was only 2 months. It was a decent job for someone just out of high school. I never paid much attention to anyone's business but my own, until one night when I heard a large thump from outside. I looked up from the sink, my hands covered in soap. The restaurant had long closed, and I was probably one of the few employees left in the building. I shook off my hands and walked over to the door. When I opened it, I found a large truck outside. It wasn't uncommon for food deliveries to come at night, but there was instantly something off about the scene. I recognized Daniel, who was my boss and the diner's owner, shaking his head, staring at something inside the truck. 2 men stood next to him, dragging something to the back door. But the worst thing was what they were holding. It was wrapped in plastic and tape, and in the shape of a human, as if it were a prop on a horror set. I stared at it for a moment, before running up to Daniel. "What's going on?" I asked. "What is that?" Daniel flinched when I spoke and turned to me quickly. Frustration and surprise were painted across his face. "What are you doing out here, Andy?" he asked. I pointed to the door and explained I had stayed late to finish dishes. He frowned, before turning back to the truck. It was then I finally could look inside. Cold air escaped the interior, pouring out like mist into the night. Inside, rows of metal racks lined the walls, all containing long, plastic-wrapped objects. A man stood next to them with a clipboard, detailing something. "What is this?" I asked Daniel after a moment. He sighed. "You know how business has been lately, Andy. I didn't think you'd stay long enough to find this out, but we've resorted to unusual ways to maintain profits." "Those are dead bodies?" I asked. I knew they were, but I hoped he would confirm my suspicion. "We've become a moving company for them. We use one of the old refrigerators inside to store them, before they are eventually transported elsewhere. That's all we do, nothing else." I stood for a moment in silence. I couldn't believe it. Daniel didn't like my disbelief and added something I couldn't say no to. "If you don't tell anyone, I'll give you a large portion of the profits." And so, I agreed. I continued my job there, but with a substantially larger wage. The noises of the trucks at night started not to faze me anymore. Every other employee seemed to know about it, reassuring me that they only passed through. They never told me where they came from, however, but with the jokes they made about the situation, I couldn't imagine the reason was sinister. The situation had never scared me much until last night, when I went to the refrigerator. It's an old walk-in, small enough that it barely manages to fit in the back corner of the diner. After opening the door, the foul smell of death spilled out. I plugged my nose and quickly stepped inside to get a closer look. I not only wondered about where the bodies came from, but also, what they looked like. It was stupid curiosity. I let the door slowly close behind me. Racks were placed everywhere inside, so numerous that I'm sure they could fit at least a dozen corpses if stacked properly. Unfamiliar stains marked the floor and shelves, and little clumps of what I assumed to be skin were just as frequent. But the worst part was that there was nothing else. There were no bodies. I stumbled out of the refrigerator. Were they transported out already? It had only been a day since they arrived. "Daniel?" I called out. I didn't know what I expected him to tell me. I started towards the back door, only to stop halfway. A strange aroma wafted out of the kitchen. Most nights, the chefs would prepare food for the following day, but I had never smelled anything like it before. "Eric?" I said once I made it to the kitchen. Littering the counters was paper-wrapped meat. A meat slicer sat in the back, and operating it was the chef. My eyes wandered down to his arms to see what he was doing, but instead of finding him holding pork or any other meat, Eric was slicing a human forearm. "What are you doing?" The words escaped my mouth, small and shaky. "Where's the meat?" He looked up to me, grinning. He slid the arm across the blade, and thin strips of flesh fell into his hand below. "What are you talking about, Andy? This is the meat."